All right. Well, welcome everyone. Really nice to see you all. It's our first baby dog, baby girl on the Zoom. I saw that, Gamal. So a lot of gratitude for you all to be here on a Friday morning. Really lucky to have Analucia and Gamal here today. So thank you both. We're a small group, which is great. Why don't we just share in the chat real quick? Who's here? So maybe write your name, write your organization, and write where you're calling in from. Gather Consulting, Long Beach. And we can just take a quick peek at who is in the room. We have a lot of some California folks, some Boston folks. Hi, Sarah from Long Beach. Go Maj Club. Hi, Sarah from JFNA. Awesome. Hey, Josh, New York, Long Beach. Yeah, good Long Beach crew today. Hey, Beza from Oakland, Ross from Brooklyn. Cool. San Francisco. Love it. So a couple folks might join. As I've been doing for the last few months, I just want to start with a moment of silence for the violence and the lost lives in Israel and Gaza and around the world. I'm sure we could use more of that. So it's great to be with you all, and it's great to see some familiar faces and some new faces as always. For those who don't know me, I'm Seth Linden. I'm the founder and principal of Gather Consulting. My board governance interest has been piqued recently because I serve on the boards of the Jewish Studio Project and Jewish Long Beach. Fellow board member Becky Silverstein here from JSP. Shout out. And I get to support a lot of boards and learn from them in my work as a philanthropy advisor and a nonprofit consultant, leadership coach, and a facilitator. So for those who are new, BoardTalk's a space to share ideas and resources around nonprofit governance and to connect with and learn from other board members. We've been doing this since COVID, and we're relaunching. We relaunched a few months ago. And a shout out to Gamal, who's been with me in this project since the early days. So great to have you back, friend. Boards have a responsibility, I believe, to step up now and always. I believe boards are a community, they're a cohort, they're a staple of democracy. And we need courageous, curious, and compassionate boards now more than ever. We know that in a crisis, there is danger and opportunity. And so I was asking myself last night, what's the opportunity here 7 months after 10/7, a world that's seemingly on fire? What can we do together? And so I hope that through BoardTalk, we might discover and engage in new ways of education and advocacy for effective governance, good decision making, and just equitable leadership models, especially during crises. So with that, for those who've been with us before, we're going to do a quick breakout. If you're able, I'm just going to break us out into pairs for 5 minutes. And all you have to do is just say hi and introduce yourself, connect with one another. I'll put a couple prompts here in the chat if it's helpful. How are you doing as a human, and how are you doing as a nonprofit leader? So quick breakouts. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see how this works. Yeah. All right. I'm going to see you in 5 minutes.
Sometimes.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. Sorry. That sounds great. I've been watching, I think we're all watching videos these days, right? When we can't make the things live. So hope that was, hope you met someone new, or hope you enjoyed your conversation if it was someone you already knew. So now we get to dive in and talk with our special guests, and I'm going to fanboy a little because I'm really excited about Gamal and Analucia being here. I'll start with Gamal, just a quick intro. He and I go back about 5 years when I first moved to Long Beach. I'm incredibly lucky to partner with Gamal on a handful of projects having to do with boards, leadership, and professional development, including democratizing the cohort-based PD experience. I'm a huge fan of his work through Conscious Builders. Before that, he was in a leadership position at Jewish Federation of LA. He does a lot of work with diversity, equity, and inclusion. He's got too many fellowships to name, but a couple that I think I know of include the Durfee Fellowship and the Schusterman Fellowship of blessed memory. He sits on several boards that I know of. um, Upstart, AJWS, and the SRE network. So thank you, Gamal, for being a conscious builder every day. And thank you for being here, my friend. Analucia and I met more recently, and we were just saying, I think this is the first time we've actually had a Zoom conversation other than kind of a larger Zoom call. So I followed her as she created and led some racial equity and leadership initiatives, many of them such as Project Shamash at Bend the Arc. She leads an impressive group of funders, guiding them on their journey and education around racial equity and inclusion. Her day job is the founder and executive director of Jewtina y Co, whose mission is to nurture Latin Jewish community, identity, leadership, and resilience. And Analucia also sits on many boards, including JDC, JPro, and Urban Adama. And like Gamal, she's also the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including from the Schusterman and Wexner Foundations. So serious kavod and respect, Analucia, for your leadership. So Gamal and Analucia, really grateful to have you both here. Thank you for joining BoardTalk together. Very lucky to be in conversation with you. Analucia, I'd love to just start with you, and maybe you can just start by telling us a little bit about Jewtina y Co and what it's been like these past 7 months for you and your board.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here with all of you. You said our mission perfectly. Jewtina y Co, our mission is to nurture Latin Jewish community, identity, leadership, and resiliency. We are a group of almost 300,000 Jews, so this specific identity as being Latin Jews across the United States, with an additional something around 400,000 Latin Jews living in the diaspora as well. And by being Latin Jews, we mean being people who identify as both Jewish and of being from the Latin American community. Specifically in the Americas. Sometimes people confuse it with Iberian Peninsula and Spain, but we're really focused on the experience of the Americas. And in addition to serving our Latin Jewish community, we are really committed to nurturing strong coalitions with non-Jewish Latino organizations, and of course, with Jewish organizations that don't necessarily have an expansive understanding of global Jewish diversity. And for us, it's been so key to sit, just by nature of our intersection, committed to building bridges and ties amongst our communities, especially given the fact that Latin Jews, the 3 cities with the most Latin Jews are New York, Miami, and Los Angeles, which also are big cities where independently Jews as a whole and then Latino people as a whole live. And so we really serve as this, we're committed to continuing that work. And of course, over the last 7 years, or the last 7 months, that work has been especially important. I think for many of us, we have, aside from it just being a tragic, I don't think anybody went to sleep on October 7th not thinking about what took place in Israel. And I think a lot of people also had in their gut, in the pit of their stomach, this fear of what could happen. And truly, here we are 7 months later with that aftermath, that pit in our stomach and in our hearts, having come to fruition. And I think that there is a lot of complex grief and pain that many members of our community are holding. And I think that complex grief and pain extends to feeling at times out of place in communities that have been really important to us. And so I'm thinking specifically of our Latin Jews, who a big part of their lived experience as humans is being in a lot of other independent Latino spaces, and oftentimes feeling as if it might not be a safe place to be, given the fact that you're Jewish. And if you're outwardly and openly and proud to be Jewish, things can get complicated. And we've seen that take place. And our community is really diverse. I'll get into it in a little bit with other questions, but we're diverse on everything, where it is that we come from, what our favorite foods are, even certain language and slang, and of course, how we think about Israel and how we think about this war, and navigating a group of such diverse people, when we name that as being the beauty of who we are, has been especially complex. And so we really had to meet the moment with a lot of tenderness and a lot of room for expansion. And so that's, in summary, what the last 7 months have been like.
Thanks, Analucia. And Gamal, how about for you? Can you talk about the last few months and what it's been like for you in your work and the boards where you serve?
Sure. So it's really great to be with everyone this morning, and at least it's morning here in Los Angeles. And it's my work and also boards have been really mixed. So I work both in the Jewish and the non-Jewish communities. So my consulting firm, we work with leaders around the world, executives, CEOs, senior teams, et cetera, in multiple sectors to help them to do culture shift work and long-term strategy in terms of the kind of culture that they want to have, as well as, designing internal programs, et cetera, and also working with their boards, both corporate and nonprofit boards. And there was a very funny thing that happened, but not so funny, on October, I guess maybe 10th or 11th, where I walked into the offices of one of my clients in Hollywood, and they asked me how I was doing. Somebody asked me how I was doing, and I said, "Oh, not that great," which is usually, as a consultant and as a person who's sort of there to empower teams, et cetera, that's not a typical response that I would have. But I'm also pretty authentic, keep it real kind of person. And I just said, yeah, it's a really hard time right now. And I kind of momentarily forgot that the company had just done a layoff the week prior. And so the person who I was talking to thought I was referring to the layoffs that had happened. And that similar conversation, sort of interaction, happened 3 different times within the span of like 10 minutes of walking through this company. And why I bring that up is because it shows just how much some people are thinking about this. And in our world, in the Jewish space, we're obviously thinking about this a lot, and it is deeply impactful and continues to be, and disturbing. But that, really, I think for us to be able to make a difference, we need to figure out ways to have not only internally or insular conversations within our community, but how can we bring the understanding, the nuanced understanding of all that happened and that continues to happen, as Analucia was saying, outside of our community. And so that's been a big part of what I've been doing with boards, whether they be Jewish or non-Jewish boards, corporate or nonprofit boards, is to bring in these conversations and push them to be talking about what's happening and to try to bring a level of nuance and understanding. I really feel that, that is one of the key things necessary to come to some kind of, I don't even know what you call it, resolution, but to at least settle the very intense anxiety and sort of like, I don't know what the word is, maybe it's trauma or fear, or even at some cases just ignorance, that we need to continue to build bridges and to create opportunities for people to have dialogue. Because the last thing that I'll say is that I'm also finding, both socially and on boards as well, and with clients, sort of with teams, is that whether it's about what's happening in Israel and what's happening in Gaza, or whether it's about what's happening in our own political sphere, or even other important issues, is that people are more and more just not talking, and they are not sharing their opinions, and which means that they're not exercising their opinions, and they're not actually growing, right? So you kind of stay stuck if you don't have that opportunity to really be in dialogue and to learn from each other and to consider other points of views. And so for me, that's kind of been a big push-pull that I've taken on to try to help people to be in dialogue in different sectors and areas, and largely talking about things that they typically wouldn't talk about. but I think it's important for us to do so.
Thanks, Gamal. That's a good segue. The next question was just around if you could lift up a specific story, a specific experience or incident that's happened that you've done on with your board, or that you've experienced, that you could say, that stands out as particularly helpful as a best practice. Maybe something around how do you engage in dialogue when folks don't want to talk? Is there a story that you can share?
Is that towards moi?
That was towards you, and then we'll go back.
Okay.
We'll see.
Yeah, so there's one story that comes to mind where I was in a board conversation and they were deciding whether or not they wanted to put a statement out. And the organization doesn't work in Israel, and does not work in the American Jewish community. And there were people who you could kind of see wanted to say, yes, we should put out a statement. And some people sort of said it, and one or two people did say it. And then there were other people who said, but just because we don't put out a statement, it doesn't mean what people want to make it mean, right? And so it's really about staying true to the principles and the mission of the board and the organization that you're on. And there are lots of statements out there. And I think also the statement fever that we're in right now is really dangerous. We're seeing the impacts of it in real time, where people who have chosen to put out a statement are being blacklisted. They're losing funding because maybe their statement wasn't strong enough, or because it wasn't as to the right or to the left or whatever as their funders wanted it to be. And I think that, statements are a reaction to the moment. And I like to work with organizations on creating a point of view, because a point of view is something that can actually evolve and change over time, right? And so it's not our statement, it's not our permanent stance. This is what we're thinking about now as one option. And even with doing that, it still really sort of can play into the whole statement fever that I mentioned. And so ultimately, the organization chose to not pursue putting out a statement, which I think makes sense. And I think that we just have to really stand in our values and our principles and not be sort of swayed with the wind that comes on that particular day.
Thanks, Gamal. And honestly, similar, actually, your answer, Gamal, kind of is again a good segue to a question around, Analucia, how have you your organization, or again any of the boards that you sit on, wrestled with putting out statements or not?
Yeah, so such a great question. I'll just answer a little bit of give a little bit of example as well. Well, no, I'll start with the statement piece actually. On October 7th, I was actually in Gambia when everything was going down. And so I woke up and I was already very connected to the news. So by the time my friends were waking up in the United States, or family was waking up in Peru or not, we had already a good segment of time to catch up on what was taking place. And we already kind of understood that there was a number of Latin Americans that were impacted on October 7th specifically, Jewish and non-Jewish. And at Jewtina, there's statements we can make about everything, right? There's things happening in the world all the time. We made a statement previously in the past on Uvalde because it was deeply impacted the Latino community in the United States, and it felt really connected to what it is that we do, and to a lot of our families and our communities that live in Texas. But for example, we didn't put out a statement when the war broke out in Ukraine, not because we didn't care, but because it felt like we needed to kind of find a way in which to not just feel like anytime some big thing happens in the world, we're going to be moving towards putting out a statement, right? And our mission, we serve English-speaking North American Latin Jews living in countries where English is one of the national languages that kind of dominates the experience, right? So Israel, even though we've got a number of Latin Jews and Latin Americans that live there, we've had to really be careful about how we even program out around Israel, because it can be mission creep, right? We're really trying to focus on, there's enough things to do for Latin Jews in the United States. There is not necessarily infinite resources to do more. But on October 7th, by the end of the day, it became very clear that this was going to hit a little bit differently because of the impact it had on specifically the Latin Jewish community. And of course, and the whole Jewish community in the world as a whole. And so it was kind of a no-brainer for us. And we moved pretty quickly on that and wrote a statement and sent it out on October 8th. Of course, naming our grief and also condemning all forms of violence and what we knew it was the potential of more civilians being harmed on all aspects, not one side more than the other, but everyone that lives in community in that part of the world. And I think we feel really, really happy to have put out that statement. We also put out a couple of different we released a couple of different commemoration statements and held commemoration events for the Shloshim. And then, of course, we specifically, once we had more information, were able to lift up which Latin American countries had been impacted. And by the time December rolled around, right as we were preparing for Hanukkah, we had to face the fact that at the end of the day, we needed to continue to do our work. And so much of what we were moving our work around, we were pausing, and we were just feeling a bit nervous because there is still something taking place. But again, we needed to be centered around our mission, and we needed to work towards transitioning ourselves back to our incredible program offering that our community needed. We felt, and we continue to believe today, needed now more than ever. And our board was so central to that understanding and knowing that we needed to be able to move forward with our work. And that, of course, it didn't mean that we forgot what was taking place, but at the same time that we needed to also commit to what we wanted to be doing. And it was very apparent that our community needed it. And I think our board has been just so central in helping us think through what holding a complex spaces looks like. We had a board retreat at the start of the year, and we modeled, like, what does it look like to engage in a facilitated conversation around the expansiveness of what we're all holding at this moment in time. And I'll tell you, our team and our board have vastly different belief systems with what it is taking place. We know that. We hold a lot of space for that. We know that regardless of where we stand on various issues, on numerous things, that we are committed to the mission, we're committed to the work, and we're committed to staying in dialogue with one another. If we can't do that with one another, how can we model that for our larger community? And how can we model that with the coalitions that we're trying to build across, with Jews and Latino folks? And that was, I still think about that today because it's really guided a lot of our processing sessions, as well as how we bring in and how we hold space at different in-person sessions, or when things come up, when there's still 19 Latin American hostages in Gaza and things come up all the time. For us, people reach out, and we've really had to navigate holding space and at the same time knowing who we are as an organization and with our mission. And it's been really, really tough, but we can do hard things. So.
Yes, we can. Yes, you can. I appreciate that. I got some more questions, but I want to offer and open it up to the group here. If you all have questions, feel free to take yourselves off chat or off mute, write a question in the chat, raise your hand. The floor is yours. Yeah, Rachel, thank you.
I'm so sorry.
Just maybe introduce yourself and where you're calling in from.
Great. I'm Rachel Petru. I am the Chief Development Officer for Hillel at UCLA. Hi, you guys. Been there for 13 years, and I just came into the call at 9:30-ish. So I'm really sorry I missed a lot of what happened in the beginning, but I'm wondering if this might be an okay place to share a budding idea and get your take, the panelists' take on it, because I heard you talking about statement making and mission drift. And Hillel at UCLA's mission is to create a scenario where Jewish students can steep themselves in Jewish life and develop for themselves an authentic sense of Jewish identity that endures. And campus climate has become so hostile that many Jewish people on campus are reserving their Judaism, and may not even go the extra effort to come to Hillel and be in the singular safe place to publicly express your Judaism. And then, of course, this is doubly difficult for any Jews of color or other minority Jews who are being further excluded from their own communities. And an idea is emerging, has been since October 7th, that whereas in the past Hillel at UCLA has been primarily focused on engaging undergraduate students, that in order to create the environment on campus that the students need to thrive, we may need to take on a mantle of almost like a JCRC for our city of UCLA, which is not like all campuses. It is like a city unto itself. And so just right now we're talking about it, and we've been getting more involved with administration and with faculty. But I'm just wondering, like, what your take is on expanding the services provided of an organization in order to fulfill this, original mission and purpose of that community organization.
Thanks, Rachel.
Is it mission drift? Is it mission centered? Like, I feel it's mission centered. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on it. Yeah.
I'll start with that. I think Israel's, anytime that anything happens in Israel, it's a really difficult thing to completely ignore, because it does impact our community, regardless of whether or not doing Israel work is part of her mission or not, right? Because whether people might have family there, people might have friends there, people might have longing to be there. Like, there's so many different things that impact our community. People might be distraught by what's taking place what's taking place that might be impacting or might be preventing peace. Like, there's so many different things that are impacting Jewish people's lives when anything takes place in the region. And I think for us, and why I was describing mission creep, was that if it becomes, at least for us, where it is preventing us from doing all the other things that we want to be doing and need to be doing, I think that is something that really needs to be paused and thought about. And again, for our community in particular, we have such a diverse group of people who had very strong opinions about Israel and Palestine prior to October 7th, and who's now, and that expansiveness, and that has expanded even more so now, right? And it's become, unfortunately, it feels like it's become a lot less nuanced for some people. And so for us, it's really become important that we create opportunities for people to look at, to not become like single party, single ticket party people who all of a sudden are just like jumping on this easy binary thinking of like team A, team B, team underdog, team this, which is really what's been playing out. And so for us, it was really about, okay, this is where we need to be doing our work. And we also recognize that given everything that's taking place in the world, people need our work now more than ever, right? A lot of Latin Jews don't feel comfortable being in Jewish spaces because many people think that there is this assumption that they are going to be with have one particular way of thinking. And to be fair, they might have that, but that again, that assumption of not even being able to be in a space has created an even greater need, I think, for folks to be able to come to our space and we never say we can't talk about what's happening. That's not a policy for us. But we know that for folks who are coming to our space, that's not the only thing that they're looking for to think about. They're really looking to be with other folks and enjoy being Jewish, right? They want to be able to be in a place. And I think that for us, it was really important to name that was where we were going to have the greatest impact. And so it might be a little bit different for folks on campus, just given that there's a whole there's different layers of experience that are taking place. But that's why I think it's a little bit on a case by case, and the board is such a critical part of helping think through that.
Thanks, Analucia. Thanks, Rachel, for that question. Anyone else have a question for these folks? I'm going to go back to my questions while you're thinking about it. Gamal, I'm curious. We've asked this before. You know, I've talked a little bit about this. How do you know when to align? When there's a decision that you need your board to be aligned with or on versus just informed about? I'll stop there. Or if you want me to
For
say,
example, I mean, that's
sure.
very broad.
Yeah. So for example, let's just go back to the statement. Hey board, we're gonna make a statement. Here it is. We're informing you. Here's the statement. Versus, should we make a statement, and how can we align on what that statement is?
Right. I mean, I think the board's job is to their fiduciary responsibility, right? And they're there to take care of the whole organization in terms of its policies, procedure, is it, and also the impact of the organization in terms of how it's perceived, right? Which is a big part of the responsibility. So when there's a major decision or a decision that's being made that could have major consequences that not only impact the perception of the organization, which then of course impacts the board, right? It also has to do with funding. It has to do with other factors that I absolutely think that the board absolutely think that the board should be not just sort of signing off on, but should actually be involved in. Putting out a statement, particularly on a topic that has to do with anything political, or that is, sort of social movement. I think it's important for the board to be involved in that decision-making process. Where I think it gets a little nuanced and tricky is it technically, I believe, just because the board disagrees, it doesn't mean that the executive director has to listen, right? So, so if the executive director feels very strongly and the staff is putting pressure on the executive director, I mean, I don't know if there's protocols quite yet, in terms of, is that actually a legitimate responsibility of the board to say yes or no to? Or is it that they are being informed and you're collecting their feedback and, right?
Thanks. I don't see it. What do you think about aligning versus informing your board? How do you know when to do either?
I think it's also how you inform a board should make them feel like they still can provide feedback and can provide insight, and that I think it's about that relationship that you're trying to create, right? And so and at the same time, the board is there to support the function of the organization. So I think there is a lot of time in which the board will even say to me, you and the team know what's best, and you let us know where it is that you think that we can be supportive. And so sometimes it's as easy as that, right? Where the board will really kind of share it back. We'll empower myself and to kind of create something that they'll say, great. I think with other things, it could be it requires a little bit more support, especially if I'm feeling I just need a couple of more eyes, or I need a couple of more people that can help me think through something. And even when I'm aligning if there's something that's already been crafted and it's about informing the board around it, I think it's always approached, as I mentioned in the beginning, with that that ear of curiosity and that respect for their opinion, right? And so it is, I think that's the process that I would say, but of course, there's so many other ways in which to answer that question. I'm thinking like, okay, when is it that I don't want their input? It's just like, all right, now this is what we're gonna move forward with.
Can you share? Can you actually? I'd be curious. Like, when is it? Because I used to run a nonprofit myself. I remember there are times we don't necessarily want feedback. We just want to let them know we're doing this.
Sure.
Can you share an example or a situation where that was the case for you recently?
Sure. I mean, it wasn't even, I mentioned it earlier when we made the statement on Uvalde, we just let the board know, this is what we're making the statement on.
Yeah.
And the board was like, great, thanks for letting us know.
Yeah.
And that was that, and they understood why we made the statement and they trusted us. I think, even when we made we made a statement around Israel, we also informed them about that. We didn't align with them on that because we knew that that was a lot more contentious. And what we were doing was that we weren't going to politicize. And if people see our statement, like, it was very clear that we were condemning what had taken place, and also holding a lot of complex grief for what could potentially unfold. And I think it was like, we're not going to politicize like whether we use Palestinian or not in our statement. We're naming this piece here because it is imperative to who we are as an organization. We're not politicizing their livelihood, and they belong in the statement just as much as Israelis belong in the statement, because what we're condemning is terrorism, right? And that's what was taking place. And it was there was no objections with that either. It was like a yes. But for example, there's things that we've worked on differently, and specifically when we were thinking about the war in Ukraine, we're like, do we really need to do this? Do we not need to do this? And so there was a lot more. It was more of a process, a collective process, and then we decided collectively, this is where we're going to. This is one of those situations in which it's painful. We know it is, but also we're not going to make a statement.
Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate that. I'm going to ask a couple more questions, folks. Feel free to jot any questions in the chat.
Well, I just have I had a question for folks, which is, what are have some of you been privy to this challenge, let's call it, or decision that people are facing in terms of, should we put out a statement? Should we not put out a statement? And not to, obviously, these are very private conversations, but I'm just curious what, from the folks here, what are some of the things that you might have been experiencing in this, or what are your thoughts on statements and boards? Speaking unofficially.
Should I pause the recording?
Yeah.
Thanks,
Oh,
Lisa.
go ahead, Lisa. Yeah.
Okay, I was thinking, I'm with the National Council of Jewish Women, Greater Long Beach and West Orange County. We're about a group of 300 women and men and people who aren't all Jewish. But the interesting thing was we took a stand, obviously, because Jewish is in our title, but we had very light relationships with anything Israel before this happened. We had like one grant that we gave to Israel women to empower women in Israel. And that was a national initiative. I took the lead as a board member to be in contact with the local Jewish community. The Jewish Long Beach is what we call our federation in Long Beach. And I really worked closely with them to model what our board needed to know and what our advocacy committee needed to know. It was not easy because we in our mission is progressive ideals, and we're a progressive group. And so we have Jews on all sides of us in our organization fighting for all kinds of causes. And one of my subcommittees is racial and economic justice. And I work with CLU a lot, and CLU is pretty progressive. on labor issues and on helping people who have a lot of social issue needs. I actually saw Jamal on one of the Jewish, Black Jewish relationships during Black Lives Matter that Clue co-sponsored, and it was a Zoom session, and it was very impressive because you were a calming influence. I just want to say that. And so I decided to stand up for what the needs of the Jewish community were aligned with my local community. And by having a community around me, even though there was like another segment of the community who is totally saying we need to have a ceasefire as of, October. It was taking a stand and being and saying we stand for all people at the same time. We took a stand that said we stand for all people. It wasn't too diluted. And my phone is busy in the background.
Thanks, Lisa. Anyone else want to answer Gamal's question or ping a question back at them?
I mean, I can also just share that Hillel at UCLA has taken a position that we're not a statement-making organization, and we are getting requests from the community constantly to make statements. When we share a statement, it's typically in the form of something the students have said, and it's in their voice, which I really admire their courage in doing that. And we get to be the layer between the community's feedback and how they receive it. So we can protect them from any unsavory comments, and reinforce their leadership by letting them know the positive impact that it had. It's not to never let them know that there was also rejection of it, but they don't need to see how it was rejected. But in the meantime, I think one of the gifts of being an organization devoted to pluralism is that you'll find our communications, which aren't statements, but they are an attempt at transparency and bringing people into the narrative. Is that on one day we may be criticizing the administration, and on the very next day we might be thanking them. And people will say, how can you do that? And it's an educational opportunity to say, well, because we're meeting this moment, and this is what it looks like to keep showing up. But I think it's really nice to have a firm position about making statements, but then make lots of statements and comments that serve the same kind of purpose without aligning ourselves to one static place. It allows us to be dynamic. And I really value that our board is on board with that too, and that they get that about Hillel and support us in that regard.
Thanks, Rachel. Sarah, I love your closing question. It's very similar to what I was just going to ask. Do you want to take yourself off mute and share it, or do you want me to read it? I have a barking dog. Okay, happy to. So Sarah asks, I'd be curious on your thoughts or experience on how boards can best support staff right now, recognizing the grief and complexity and strain leaders are experiencing. I open that to Gamal and Analucia for your kind of closing thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is something that I certainly deal with a lot in my work. And I think one is to listen and to create, or at least offer opportunities for staff either to come as a whole or in smaller groups, and whichever format they feel is important to express what they're thinking. I mean, I think these are really often, depending on the staff and organization, difficult conversations to, for lack of a better word, have happen, or to organize, because it can be, there's a lot of unknowns. But I think, I personally believe in the sort of smaller dialogues and you know, and having facilitators there that understand the mandate, which is like, this is not to tear the organization down, but it's to help the staff understand that there's a place for them to speak, and also an opportunity for leadership to share with staff what they're grappling with themselves and the various pressures that they are experiencing. We're in a time right now where cancel culture is a part of our culture. And so, you know, it's no longer like, don't be a part of cancel culture. It's like, we're in cancel culture. And so I think that, you know, as we can help people feel like we are actually listening, and if there are ever things that leadership can do that are even small things, I think I've seen that go a really long way. But I also think leadership has to be really firm, and not, and they need to approach their staff when, you know, in moments like this, with some clarity, because that's also what people are looking for, even if they disagree.
Thanks, Gamal. Analucia, what do you say?
I mean, I echo everything that Gamal was just sharing, and I think ultimately, especially in times of crisis, when what's taking place in one particular moment might just feel like it's all encompassing, and there's nothing, you know, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year from what's in that moment. I really do think that board members can be really helpful in reminding, and just holding everyone in that space that the work for us will continue 1 week, 1 month, 1 year from us, and, you know, holding that space for the moment, and also creating space for the tomorrow, right? And I think that that's been really helpful for us, is really being able to just have that pulse check on, this is big, and, you know, there will be other things that come up at different points in time, and not all with the same type of emotional toll, but there will be other things that take place. And so I think just kind of that resonance has been really critical.
Love that. Thanks, Analucia. Thanks for that question, Sarah. Thank you all. I just want to close with a couple thoughts. One is just our next board talk in June, June 14th, with Ananda Valenzuela. And she recently wrote and spoke about alternative and liberatory models of governance through Nonprofit Quarterly. She got a great YouTube video I can share. So just a lot of gratitude and thanks, Gamal and Analucia, for your time and your leadership, again, on and with boards. And just for everyone here, I encourage all of us to continue showing up and slowing down. I encourage you to check in with your CEO and your board colleagues and see how they're doing, to build community by building relationships. Remember, impact moves at the speed of trust. And I wish you a safe and sound weekend, and a Shabbat Shalom, and a restful rest of the day. Bye, y'all.
Bye, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.
Bye. Shabbat Shalom.